I am Patricia Thompson. With my middle name is Ann, which is an interesting thing. It goes back in my family history about 250 years. I was born in Portland, Oregon in November 14, 1945. My parents are Howard W. Browning and Lorene A. Browning. My mother's middle name was Amne, A-M-N-E. And that was a mistake in the writing of her name. It should have been Ann, A-N-N-E, but when they put it in the register, somebody goofed and put an M. So her middle name was A-M-N-E, which is Amne. You know, throughout life, one has to adjust to their position in life. And I am the middle child of 5 children. Actually, there were 6, but baby died at her birth, so there was 5 living children. I have an older brother and an older sister, and then myself and 2 younger sisters. My eldest is a brother, Bill, and the next person in line is my sister Annette, then myself, and then my sister Phyllis, and my sister Sherry, who is now deceased. So I was born in Portland, although we lived in various places because my father was in the Air Force. And so my parents weren't living together all the time because he was deployed. So a lot of times I spent in Portland with my aunt and uncle. And then when my dad got out of the service, he went to college in Forest Grove. And so we moved there and lived in student housing. And then we moved to Redmond, Oregon, and I lived there until I was in the 8th grade, where we moved to Portland. And I went 1 year to Irvington grade school, and then went to Grant High School for my high school education. When I was growing up, I had what's called the middlemost child syndrome. And that is that usually a middle child is always trying to keep peace. They're the one in the family that if anything's going wrong, they're blamed. But everybody looks to them to try to get out of being in trouble. But at the same time, my brother was 9 years older than myself, and my oldest sister was 5 years older than myself. And so they were gone at pretty much, high school and early college, out of the picture by the time my 2 younger sisters came along. So at that point, I became the older sister instead of the middlemost child. But to this day, I have the middlemost child syndrome in as much as I really want people to get along. I don't like adversity. At the same time, if something happens, I will meet it head on. And I'm a bit of a scrapper that way. My earliest memory was I'm about 5 because I had a surgery, an open heart surgery. It was, the common name was a blue baby, but the name of the surgery was appendectomy. And that happened because when I was born, the valve in my heart did not close as normal. And so they had to do an open heart surgery, and I was cut from the front to the back, splayed right open, and they did the surgery by a surgeon named Dr. Starr. Today, they do that same surgery in utero, so that is hardly anything for a baby anymore. But the birth rate, or the expected birth rate of a person with this problem was about 18 years old. So I was one of 5 experimental children having this surgery, and they hoped to save one of us. Actually, they saved 4 of us. One of the children died. Many, many years later, I was doing some care for hospice people, and I did take care of a woman, and she said, "Do you know why I can't stand anymore?" And I said, "No, why can't you?" And she said, "Because I stood for 18 hours and watched surgeries on little kids, experimental surgeries, And I worked for the Red Cross, but they allowed me to stand and watch. And so it damaged my feet, so I can't stand. And I said, wow, that's very interesting. What kind of surgery? And she said, oh, it was heart surgery. I said, really? What kind of heart surgery? And she said, well, it was open heart surgery to correct the valve problem. I said, really? I had that done. And she said, when? And I said, oh, in about 1950. And she said, are you the Browning child? And I said, well, yes, I am. So she stood and watched Dr. Starr perform this surgery. And at the time, he was just an intern, but it was his brainchild to rectify this kind of problem. And so then fast forward many, many, many years, my eldest granddaughter, was born with only half a heart. And they were able to sometimes replumb that half so the person could live. Little Abby decided, at 3 months old, that enough is enough already. So Dr. Starr, the same doctor that did my surgery, came in and did only one thing for her surgery. I have to this day pictures of Dr. Starr and I holding up our hands together over Abby when she was having the surgery. It was awesome. I also have the pictures. You could look. They didn't close her up because they had to do several operations, and so you could see her little heart beating through the plastic they had over her. But anyway, Dr. Starr is still alive, and he himself has had a triple bypass. I can't imagine being the surgeon who operated on a imminent surgeon. So anyway, but that was my earliest memory, because not the surgery itself, because obviously I was out, but in the hospital. And in the bed next to me was a child who had been in a house fire, very badly burnt. And I was told for years afterwards, if I heard a fire engine siren or something, I would go into complete hysterics because that. But what I remember is every day they would come around and I had to choose between having orange juice or chocolate milk as my snack, which was a very hard thing. So I always choose orange juice. That's my first memory. I did not do much with my older brother. He was abusive. I tried not to be around him very much. My sister, Annette, was in charge of me as a small child because both parents worked. And so she was kind of a mother figure for me. So that emotion thing was happening. Phyllis, who's the next one after me, probably we were the closest because we did a lot together. Sherry was 10 years younger than myself. And so then again, it was more, we weren't, I then took care of her. So it was almost like every child that came along was the babysitter for the next child that came along. So as I say, I was not close to my brother, don't particularly want to be. Close to Annette, close to Phyllis, and semi-close to Sherry just because of the age difference. Because so many people, the players in my family now are already gone. And my sister Annette refuses to talk about it. She doesn't want to hear it. And it just never, my sister Phyllis knows, but Sherry was so far younger than me, so much younger, it just never came up. But he was sexually abusive. And that's about all I can say about that. And, you learn very quickly. Like, if you get burnt on a hot stove, you're probably not going to hit that stove again. And my brother's the same thing. So once he messed with me, and this was when I was 6, but even as a 6-year-old, I knew it was wrong, and I never put myself in that position again to be left alone with him. But he was also not only mean that way, but I was going to say earlier, my earliest memory, which was the hospital, but when I was 6 years old, I was deathly afraid of the dark. I could not go to sleep in a dark room. I couldn't go out by myself in the dark. And we lived in Redmond in a house that had an alleyway in the back, and that's where all the bums and stuff would go back and forth. And my parents were gone one time, and he shoved me out the door and locked it in the dark. And I was just totally petrified. And as clear as day, I can remember saying, okay, God, if you're real, you're going to take care of me, and nothing bad is going to happen. And immediately, fear of dark left me. I just sat there and, played with some sticks and stuff until he finally relented and opened the door. And I've not been afraid of the dark since, and I love dark. My mom was always very present. If I've learned anything about mothering, it's because of my mom. She was, for me, a very great woman. She also had to work, in long hours, but mainly she worked at night. So she was there during the day, but then we were in school during the day, so it didn't make a lot of sense. But one thing I remember about my mom, to me, is very special, but whenever we heard a siren going by, we became the ambulance chasers. So she and I would go run out and jump in the car and follow the whatever siren it was. And when we got to the place, whatever was happening, we would sit and we would pray. It's just something that was unique with my mom and myself. And then once every Saturday, we would just about 5 o'clock in the morning get up and leave everybody and go out for breakfast, just she and I. So there's some very good memories. She was as good a mom as she could possibly be. She had to work, and it's just that each kid that came along was basically old enough to take care of the next. Although that didn't happen with Brother Bill. There were some issues with my brother Bill, and he was spastic. When he was born, it was an instrument birth. It slipped and hit his head. So one side of him does not work so well. Anyway, so Annette would always be the mother to him, and she would fight any kid around who made fun of her big brother. So Annette actually was put in the position of being mother to the brother and to her younger sister. I would say I was probably about 10. My mom taught me how to play pinochle. Now, this may sound like a strange hobby, but we would, in our backyard, we would have different people, friends, mainly Annette and Phyllis and I. But we would be in the backyard and we'd play pinochle. And I remember I loved being partners with my mom. I just loved it. If we could kind of decide which suit to make the main suit in pinochle, if she wanted it to be heart, she would go, so pounding her heart. Or if she wanted it to be diamond, she'd play with her ring. Or so I would know what suit she was going to call. If I had the appropriate cards in those suits, I would go, oh, it's such a nice day. If I didn't have the cards, I'd say, oh, I really am getting tired. So we had these little, not very transparent, I'm sure, but little cues that we worked back and forth. Now, that's not a hobby, but that's a very, very strong memory in my mind. So hobbies really I didn't have any hobbies necessarily, except reading. I was an avid reader. But by the time I was in late high school, Annette, my sister, taught me how to crochet. And that has been my strongest hobby throughout. In my heart and in my mind, I'm an artist, but it does not come out through my fingers. So what do you do? Hobbies. My biggest hobby probably is people. I love people watching. We used to go, again, my mom and Annette and I, we go out to the airport and we go in and we just sit and watch people, comment on their antics as they walk by or how they were dressed or whatever. It's not exactly a hobby, but it was a big interest. My Christian life started with being shut out in the dark. I was also very aware of I didn't understand it, but I was aware of the fact that I was very blessed because I had lived through the surgery where they didn't think they would be able to save all the kids. So that was always in the back of my mind. When I was about 7 or so, we were in church one day and the communion came, and since I wasn't baptized, I didn't get to take communion. So it would always pass me by. I mean, I sat there as a little kid, and here would come everything, and they'd actually go way out in front of me so I wouldn't grab it. So I told my mom and dad, I said, I really want to take communion. And they said, well, you need to talk to the pastor about that, Patty, which I was called at that point. And so I said, okay. So I talked to the pastor after church, and I said, I want to be baptized. And he said, oh, Patty, we would wait until we're about 12 to be baptized. And I said, why? And he said, well, that's the age of accountability when people start understanding baptism. And I remember looking, I don't know how tall he was, but I was very short. So I remember looking up at him and I said, I think I love Jesus just as much as you do. The next weekend I was baptized. All of us kids were at that point. Sherry wasn't born, Phyllis wasn't born, so it was 3 of us were baptized. So my spiritual development has just been gradual over the years, and not culminating, because one always, if you stop growing spiritually, something's very, very wrong. So that's all I can say. So much later, I did have a huge experience with the Lord. Middle school for me was awful. That's when I started smoking. I was only in school maybe half the time. I always dreamt up some excuse not to go. I hated, because it was the 8th grade is when we moved to Portland, and it was just a hard adjustment for me. High school was a bit better. More kids. I didn't know anybody, nor did I really care to. My friends are mainly at church. I did have a couple of friends in high school. One of my better friends, her name was Adrian, but her dad molested her and she ended up killing herself. So she committed suicide, or as they say, she, what is the word they say? Anyway, completed suicide. But my best friend in high school didn't go to my school. She went to Franklin. That was LaVon Grendall. And then I was a year ahead of her. So when I got to college and the next year, we were in the same dorm. She came to NCC too. So, I existed in high school. Didn't like it. Didn't do much. Read a lot, but didn't get in any trouble. Just kind of, did my little depression stuff on the side. Existed. I went to college because I wanted to be somebody. Have something I could hang my hat on to prove that I was real, I was okay, that I wasn't as bad as I thought I was. So I went to NCC, Northwest Christian College, because I got, the first year was paid scholarship. And by then I was heavy into music and the singing. But it was just, I loved college. And if I could now, we're actually spending money in other ways of building buildings and stuff. But if I had just unlimited funds, I would always go to college. Because now I have my degree, which is in education, but I could just take anything I wanted without worrying about, do I have to make good grades or do I have to impress anybody? No, just go, learn, experience. I met Jim in college, although he remembers me when he was a senior in high school, and a singing group that I belonged to in college had gone to his town of Roseburg, and we did a concert. He remembers me from that concert. I don't have a clue as to who he was at that point. But in college, my vocal instructor said, you need to get somebody in here to be your accompanist. And so I went over to the Anchorage where college kids hang out all the time. And so I said, does anybody know somebody who play the piano? And they said, oh, that guy over there, Jim Thompson, can. So I went over and I said, I've heard that you play the piano. Would you be interested in playing for my lessons? I said, some of my music is a little complicated. I had no idea how well he played. So he just he said, sure. He said, what are you paying me? And I said, I'll pay you because by that time I could get beer and he couldn't. I said, I'll pay you a bottle of beer per lesson. And he said, okay. I actually never gave him any beer, but then he just started playing. And then we dated, and the rest is history. Jim was the third person who proposed to me. So I had dated. In college, and I have never really understood. Sometimes things go above my head. In one of my classes in college was a guy from Africa. His dad was the chief of his tribe or whatever, the town there. And so we would go out a lot. He was a really nice guy. Winston was his name. And because he was black, and it never occurred to me there would be a problem going out with somebody because they're black, but people would drive by the street and roll down their windows and say obscene things to us. Anyway, but he never asked me to marry him. When I was a senior in high school, Gilbert Krebs was the first person who asked me to marry him. And he was from Canada. He worked for the postal system there, Edmonton, Alberta. And he was visiting aunt and uncle here, were friends of my parents. So we dated for the whole summer. And when he was getting ready to leave, he asked me to marry him. But he was okay. He was fun enough. But there's two things that made me just decide, no, this cannot be. One is, as we were traveling at night, going down the side streets of Portland, when we got to a intersection, he would turn off the headlights because he was speeding. That way he could tell if somebody was coming the other way so he could slow down. I thought that was rather foolish. So I thought, no, I don't think I can marry this person. And we went on a Ferris wheel ride, which I'm not fond of Ferris wheels anyway, but we're on the ride, and he had his arm around my shoulder, gripping my shoulder, shaking. He was so scared. And I thought, I don't think so. No, so I said, Gil, you're a really nice guy, and I've had a lot of fun, but you need to go back home. No, I cannot marry you. And then the next person I dated, his name was Tagan Ha. He was from Vietnam, South Vietnam. And we dated for maybe a year. And then he had to go back home. And he asked me to marry him, go with him. And I said, no, I don't think I can do that. I can't leave family. I can't do that. Because family is extremely important in my life. So he left. Years later, when I lived in Albany, older two children still in Portland, Jeremy is with us in Albany, but I got a letter from Tag and Hop, and it said, I always know that I love you, and I know that the stars and the moon that I look up at night are looking down at you too. It was very nice. But by then I thought it was a little silly, but it was very poetic. Very nice.
So what advice?
The process of trying to choose, and it is trying to choose someone to marry, can be very trying. First of all, I would never date somebody that I could not laugh with. I mean, that's the very first thing. The second thing is I would not date somebody who did not share my faith. And I don't mean what church they go to. I really don't care about churches. It means a little bit to me, but not much. But if they don't have faith in God, that's the end of the dating, as far as I'm concerned. What draws me to people is their humor, their sense of humor. What keeps me with people is their faith in God. So And that's something that you may find, like immediately you meet somebody and you go, oh, this is, this guy fits all the bill. Or it could take literally years. And people change. So early relationships are good. And if you commit to that relationship and grow together, that's good. But people change so much. And so I was married when I was 22 and Jim was 21 because his mom would not give us permission to get married. So he had to wait till he's 21. Even that's a little early, but here we are 54 years later, still married. So it can work. It can be good, but we both have several things going. Our belief in God. We're very stubborn people, probably not going to give up just because we're stubborn. So there is that. But people keep maturing well into the 30s, sometimes longer. Doesn't mean you should wait till you're 30. But if you get married thinking, oh, I'm going to help change him or her, bad decision. You get married because you're able to accept that person who they are at that time. And so, never get married. And don't even continue in a relationship if you have that thought, oh, I can be their savior. I can help them along the way. I can. It's just not a good idea. Jim and I, we dated in college for 2 years, and then he gave me a book by St. Francis, The Little Flowers of St. Francis. It's a devotional book, and we had talked about not us getting married together, but what marriage should be like. Now, from a girl's standpoint, that's a whole lot more important than a guy's standpoint, I think. But anyway, so he gave me this little book, and he said, I want to give this to you because I wanted you to use it in your prayers because I'm joining the monastery. And I'm thinking, what? Well, something's gone wrong here. I'm not quite sure what this is. But he did. He went into the monastery for a year. Then he got out because he realized that he loved me enough to get out and not stay there. Although in some deep ways, he's always been a monk. So, but anyway, then he went in the Navy, and we became engaged at that point. He went in the Navy. Navy was gone for boot camp for 6 weeks, got out, and we were married. And then he went to his first deployment, and I stayed with my parents for 3 months, and then I finally flew out to South Carolina and joined him there. Early marriage was an adjustment, but then again, A, we love God, B, we're stubborn, and C, we loved each other. So, and he was out for 6 months and in for 6 months. Out for 6, in for 6. Strangely enough, when he was in for 6, I became pregnant. When he was out for 6, I delivered. And this happened. The first 2 children were 11 months, 2 weeks apart. And before the children were born, I worked for the Navy working with blueprints. But several things I do remember. We lived in this little carriage house, which had a lot of mice. But Jim would have guys come over from the ship because he was one of the few that actually had housing off base. And so they'd sit around and chit-chat and whatever. So, but everybody knew that when Jim came out winding his clock, that was time they had to leave, setting the clock to get up in the morning. He had one particular friend, Patrick Murphy, who eventually married my younger sister, but they would sit around and light a candle, and they would both stare at the candle, trying to make the flame go higher and higher. Well, I'm extremely pragmatic. To the core, I am pragmatic. And so I just couldn't see the sense in this. So I would sit across the room and I'd go, Then they wanted to go to a graveyard because South Carolina, Charleston, of course, where the It's a big war place from the Civil War. But anyway, they had all these graveyards. And so they wanted to go out and see the ghosts at night. And so I said, fine, but I'm coming with you. And they said, no, because you don't believe in it. And I said, no, but I'm coming with you. So they never went because they were saddled with this very pragmatic individual who just would think it's stupid. So, but early marriage it was fun. A lot of church work when Jim was not out to sea, and yeah, it was good.
So then you had 2 kids.
We had 2 boys while we were in the Navy. Got out. We wanted to have another child, but didn't seem to be able to. And I had talked to my doctor, and I said, well, I don't know why I can't have another child. And he said, well, at your age, if you can't figure it out, there's nothing I can do to help you. And then, sure enough, Jeremy came along 10 years after Jason, his older brother. So, but when Jeremy was little, maybe 3 and 4, his older siblings took him everywhere. They would take him with them I didn't need to. I didn't want my baby to go places. I wanted to keep him with me. But no, they needed to take him to play pool with the other kids, or they needed to take him swimming. They ended up taking him to Disneyland. I mean, they really loved their little brother. I don't know what most parents go through in raising their children, but if they're anything like me, you do your best you can. To me, raising my kids meant I had fun the most I could, in part whatever wisdom, but kids will choose to believe and to glean however they want. But I had a hoot raising my kids. I loved them. Although each one of them in their own way had some rather serious issues in their life, but I didn't know about it because they never confided with me. And so just didn't know things were happening, which is maybe bad, but in a way a blessing too. So I loved raising kids. I could have had more. Since my kids are now over having kids, I would adopt some more grandkids as far as I'm concerned. I love kids. Well, in raising children, I think a lot of people have, and which I did, as growing up, I thought, when I have children, I'm not going to do this and such. One of them, it seems like silly now, but a very huge thing, it was when I was growing up, my parents would say, I'm going to be here at 12 o'clock or whatever to pick you up. And if we weren't there at 12 o'clock, we were in a great deal of trouble. But they never were, you understand. They were always late. And so I thought, when I have my children, I'm going to rectify this. If I say I'm going to be somewhere, unless there's an emergency, I'm there. I'm not going to do that to my kids. So that's one thing that the hangover from my growing up experience. My dad he never, he hit me a couple of times, but I can't say he's abusive, but he had an extremely hot temper, very hot. And so to this day, and in raising my children, if I hear somebody cussing, I tense up immediately. My whole body goes, and it's ridiculous. I mean, this is like, how much years? 60 years ago. And yet that growing up experience has done this. I've tried as much as possible to be a non-cusser, although there's some words that for the life of me, I don't see as a cuss word. So I may use it. But I tend not to cuss, and never would I use the Lord's name in vain. I just would not do that. Because that's not only bad for me, for my child, but it's bad for my relationship with God. So I just don't do it. I seldom cuss once in a while. But that's left over from my dad. My mom would say things like hell's bells, something like that. But She didn't cuss. Oh, she did say shit once in a while, and that's the one word that I just don't think of as a cuss word. So I may say it sometimes, and Jim will call me on it every time. So I try not to say it, but it's, to me, not a cuss word. I don't know. It's a bona fide word. And if you're in the Navy, maybe that's where I picked it up the most. In the Navy, you packed your shit and got on board. So, and it is another word for fecal matter or poop. So it's just not a cuss word, it's a word. Yeah. So that's maybe, I try not to even say that. If I get really disgusted or mad about something, I may let it fly, but seldom. I didn't use a cuss word at all, but I remember one time I was talking to Jeremy and Seth was there, and it's something about smoking and the fact that I did smoke at one time. And Seth said, he got real excited. He said, oh, good. Oma has said I could smoke. And I remember saying, I did not say that. Because I don't want, I think he was putting me on, but I didn't want him to take free license of that either. But I did smoke, Jim and I both. And when Michael was about 4, and I did not know at all at that time, it was so many years ago, the bad things about the secondhand smoke. But so Michael's sitting on my lap as I'm smoking. And he said, Mommy, when I grow up, I'm going to smoke like you and Daddy do. So I took the cigarette and I showed it to Michael. And I said, see this? And I put it out. I said, Mommy and Daddy don't smoke anymore. And Jim came home from college and he said, I'm going to go down and get some beer and cigarettes. And I said, well, you can get the beer, but forget the cigarettes. And after I scraped him off the ceiling, I think he smoked a couple times with his grandpa when they were together. But neither one of us, I never smoked again. And they weren't in my house either. So, yeah. When I was in college, I had grown up in the Disciple of Christ or Christian church. But when I was in college, I kind of stumbled into the Episcopal church. Jim and I had just barely started dating, and he had asked me to go out to dinner. And in college, you never turn down a free dinner, ever. So I said, okay. So on the way, he said, I have a typewriter that types in Greek. And I was looking up at him. Again, I'm short, he's tall, so I was looking up, and I missed the curb, and I fell flat on my face. And he looked down, and he said, My, you're clumsy. And then he wanted to help me up, and I don't even bother to touch me. So we walked on. He said, I forgot. I have to stop and go to church on the way. So I thought, okay, I can do this. We got to church and he said, they want me to be a server for the altar, so I can't sit with you. And I said, okay, I can do this. And came time for communion. I went up to take communion with everybody. Afterwards, Jim said, you can't take communion in my church. And I said, why not? And he said, you're not confirmed. And I said, but I'm baptized. And he said, you have to be confirmed in the Episcopal church. So I talked to the priest. The next weekend or 2 weekends later, I was confirmed because I don't let little things get in my way of communion. So anyway, and so I had decided, okay, if I'm now confirmed, I need to go to this church, I guess. And so that night Jim went out with his friends and I was in my college dorm room by myself. And somebody had found my prayer book and had torn all the pages out. And I was getting a lot of flack for going to this church. And I remember I locked the door of my room and I started crying. And I just wailed. I was so upset. And at that time, Jesus came and sat on my bed and I sat on his lap. And to me, that is more real than sitting here in this chair today. I just, no way to explain that except God did mighty work then and came and sent Jesus to me. So that was a huge point, obviously, in my life. And then many years later, as time goes on, actually, since I was a sophomore in high school, I had decided that the world would be better off without me. And so I decided, in order to do that, I really should kill myself. And I know that sounds weird, but so I would talk periodically, a couple times a year. I would see all my bad points and talk myself down. And to be in a deep depression for me is like a spiral. You go down and down and down. I would get to the very bad downtime, and God would come and he'd say, okay, so all right. So you're overweight. So you're not the brightest cookie in the room. So, he said, but you are my child. And so I would talk myself back up the spiral. And this happened until I was 35. And then Jim had gone to a pastor's retreat. And while he was there, the leader of the convener of the retreat said, there's somebody in this meeting here today who believes in Jesus, and his heart, his mind is fully convinced, but he has not a heart for Christianity. And Jim sat there and he said to himself, I don't like this man. How he knows way too much about me. Who told him about me? So the convener said, whoever needs prayer now to come forward. Well, of course, Jim couldn't do that because everybody would know. So he just sat there. And so the convener said, okay, let's do it this way. Anybody who needs help, stand up. Well, almost everybody stood up. Don't we all need help, But Jim stood up too because people would know. The guy's talking about him. Anyway, so then the guy had everybody come up one by one for a short prayer. And when Jim got up there, he drew back his hand and he was going to belt the guy. But he went down in the spirit instead. And he laid there, and then went on with the service. And everybody left except Father Carlos Rains, our dear friend, who stayed with Jim and prayed for him. And Carlos told me that at one point a big black gunky mass came out of Jim's chest and went up and dissipated in the ceiling. Anybody else, I might wonder, but Carlos is a total man of God, and I trust him very much. So Jim called, and he said, back home, and he said, oh, there's been a life-changing event in my life. And I said, what's that? And he said, well, I can't tell you over the phone. He had taken the train to the conference, and so it was 3 days later he came home. But I'm wondering 3 days later, is he decided he wants a divorce? Is he going to change churches? Decided he's gay? I don't know what he's decided. But when he got home, he told me about his experience. Sometimes I don't like scripture. And one of them I don't like is the two shall be made one, because I believe it. So whatever that was holding Jim down and arose out of him, that moment rose out of me. And then like 2 days later, I went through the whole thing again with the depression. And so I finally got to the point, I'm going to get this stuff together to kill myself, because the world would be better off anyway. And I never in all my depressions would I have ever told anybody what I was feeling, because why? I would just be making that worse. Anyway, so I got to that point, and again I said to God, I can't do this anymore. It's tiring. I can't do it. And God said, okay. I've been sad, I've been low, I've been mad, but I've never been depressed to that extent in the rest of my life. So again, there's a huge a spiritual meeting of the Lord there. God moves in our lives, and as it says in the scripture, in strange and mysterious ways. Sometimes I think it's a whole lot more strange than mysterious in my life. So we got out of the Navy, and Jim finished off his schooling. So we bought a school bus, and we renovated the school bus into a camper. We moved to Myrtle Point, where he still drove daily to Roseburg to operate the school bus. We lived in a campground in Bridge. Michael and Jason went to the Bridge School. Their memory of that was their fire escape, if you're on the second floor, was a slide down on the outside of the thing. So, but anyway, we were there for a year, and then we moved to Portland, and we've always moved places because Jim has wanted to be associated with a church. Not that he had a job, no, but he wanted to be associated with a church. So, moved to Portland, no job, anything, but, God provides, and we got everything. And at that point, Jeremy was born. It was a baby. And then we had some friends who came to stay with us, but we lived in a 3-bedroom home. And at that time, we had 3 foster kids. Then we have the friends with 2 kids. And then there was a guy named John Mazulu Mungai, who was a political dissident from South Africa. Delightful man, just delightful. At one point, I looked out the door of our house or the window, and there was this black car sitting there, and they were there the next day, and there the next day. At the same time, when I was listening and talking on the phone, I would hear clicking. So I went out one day and I said, "What you doing?" And they said, "Well, we can't talk to you, ma'am." I said, "Well, you can't talk to me?" And they said, "No, we're on duty." Well, so I said, "Well, okay, if you want a cup of coffee, if you need to use the bathroom, come on in. I'm having no problem with this." And as I found out, they were CSI. We were under investigation because we had this political dissident living with us. And they stayed for another week observing us, and then they never came back. But anyway, then John Mazulu Mungai left, but he was a very, very nice guy. But one time, and Jim was at that point a priest, and so Jim was dressed all in black with a white collar. And so Jim and John were in the kitchen one time cooking, and I looked in. It was just kind of funny because there was Jim dressed all in black with a white collar, and John Mazulu Mungai was all in white with a black collar, just and black sleeves. But anyway, I just thought that was funny. So we thought, if this is ridiculous. We have all these people. So we got a big house on Hawthorne Street. We didn't get it. We rented it. And started a shelter. In 3 years, we had something like 368 people stay with us. One of those people, and it's named Micah, he was from Nigeria, but he was here not even on a green card. But Micah would sit and hold Jeremy on his lap because Micah had little kids at home, but he hadn't seen them for a long time. But Jeremy would sit there and reach up and grab a little piece of Micah's hair, which was very kinky, and pull it way up and then let go and watch it and spring back down. And Jeremy would just laugh about it. He just thought that was so funny. And he did that a lot. Anyway, finally, Micah was not in the house, and he was somewhere, and ICE got him. And I had encouraged him because I didn't know. It's one of the things in my life that I kicked myself for, but I encouraged him to cooperate, not really realizing that I don't like ICE. I don't like the fact that this man had done nothing wrong, and they detained him and sent him back. He was probably killed. So that was a sad thing. But the people who stayed, were these people coming and going. At one time, we had enough foster children to have a baseball team. So that happened. Then we moved to Albany. Michael and Jason were old enough. They stayed in Portland and took Jeremy, which was good and bad for Jeremy. But at one point, we lived in a trailer in the driveway of somebody's house, and we stayed in the Sunday school room. because again, we moved to Albany because Jim wanted to be associated with this church. Finally got a job because we operated a shelter called Fish Guest House. And then that was, that was a living. Actually, Jim worked on the outside, so I pretty much ran the place. We were considered by a missionary agency to be missionaries to Uganda, and Jim even went over there for 6 weeks to check things out. But so we went back east to the governing agency, missionary agency, and we were interviewed. And so they said to me, interviewed separately from Jim, but they said to me, "And how long have you wanted to be a missionary?" And I said, "Oh, I don't. I have no interest in being a missionary." And they, with great consternation, they said, "Well, but you're here being interviewed." I said, "I'm here because God is calling me to be here. I will do the best of my ability. You will get a very good missionary in me, but I have no interest in it." And so they passed us. So we had, I don't know how much money, but Jim is a paper trail person. So we had a lot of money sitting in the bank from deputation and stuff. And when God closed that door, he was able to give every single cent back to the people who had given it. So that ended that. Then looked for a while like we might go to, and Jeremy's still with us, so we might go to Alaska to work for the Bishop Mark McDonald up there. And that was well on its way. Then all of a sudden that door closed. And I would say, especially when we were thinking of Uganda, but I don't, instead of saying I don't want to be absent from my kids, which is the real reason, but I would say it's dusty and it's violent and, I just don't know if I want to go there. And Jeremy told me, he said, and I remember this very clearly, but he said, I think God's more interested in how well you obey than how well you whine. Yeah, that's true. So, but the door did close, didn't have to go there. So God opened another one, which was Fresno, which was hot and violent and dusty. But at least quarterly, I was able to come home to Portland to visit family, friends. So then we moved to Fresno. Jim did the church there. Jeremy's with us. Eventually, he grew up and he moved back to Portland. And then our eldest grandchild who died, Abby, when she died, I just had it. I got to go home. I got to be with family. So we sold our house, moved into a trailer to save money. When we got enough money, we had even the chart in our house with it. We kept drawing the red lines, seeing how much money we had. But finally moved back. Jeremy had married Tricia, and they lived in our house for a year, and while we operated another shelter. Now, mind you, I have really not much interest in operating shelters. Along the way, for 3 years, we fed the guys down on Burnside chili and cornbread and milk every Sunday night. I really don't like hanging out with the homeless people. It's not my thing. But again, if I believe that God is calling me to do something, I will do it to the best of my ability, whether I like it or not. Basically, my life is built around really trying to figure out what God wants me to do. Sometimes it's very clear, and other times I don't have a clue. But I try to figure it out, and even if I don't like doing it, if it's God calling me, then I do it. And there's no way around that. I don't have to like things. He doesn't tell me I have to like them. Just do them. My favorite food is popcorn, although I'm very fond of anything that's Mediterranean, except fish. Don't like fish. One time, a story about popcorn. Jeremy and I, we had a pickup, and Jeremy and I were going over to visit my dad in Redmond. He lived on a Crooked River Ranch. But anyway, so we had stopped and bought a big container of popcorn to munch away on the side. And the pickup had connecting windows in the back. And we had opened it and the windows because it was hot. And the air grabbed the popcorn, and it looked like it's one of these machines that were making popcorn. Popcorn was flying everywhere. And finally, Jeremy said, "Oh, for heaven's sakes," and he just took the thing and dumped the rest of it. I mean, just, and so popcorn was just flying. And I remember saying, your dad would not be amused. My biggest regret would be I would have liked to have gone, instead of into education back in college, I really should have gone into psychology. I love seeing how people's minds work, even evil people. I like seeing, there are a few people who are born evil maybe, but, almost even a Charles Manson, who's about as bad as they come, or Hitler, or some other people now. But that person started off as a little spotless baby, a baby who, was raised, and whatever happened in their life created them to be the monsters they are. But as a baby, most people are born pretty spotless. And leaving aside the, the thought that people are born evil, because I don't believe that. But I like seeing the way people's minds work. And maybe going back to when my mom and Annette and I would go out to the airport and just sit and watch people and their antics, and then, of course, comment on them and probably judge them. But I like figuring out people's minds. Whether I agree with them or not is not the point. There's some people who, for whatever reason, can go through, and this is not a cuss word, but go through pure hell, and yet persevere and turn out to be wonderful people. There's, in the same family, you may have somebody that whatever, they're raised basically the same, and yet something evil has entered their life. But even if it's those evil people I'm talking about, I believe that if they want, God is always there. I mean, God can enter people's lives who have done bad things and redeem them. So, but, again, if they don't want to be redeemed, although God did knock Paul off the donkey onto his what, and blind him for 3 days to get him, Paul, the Apostle Paul, to see the light. So he can do it, and he will do it if he needs to. But God yearns to have his children come to him, which is, I can understand, because I yearn to have my children come to me. One of the bigger things, I'm so proud my kids have been turned out to be great adults. On the other hand, I just wish I had this big complex that we could all live together, because I'm not ready to let my kids go. The mother that I am, I guess. My love language is time. Yeah. Give me a couple hours with somebody, mainly my children, and a cup of coffee or a Coke, and I'm one happy camper. I have insomnia, and my mind does not shut down. And it can't. If it were great things, then it would be worth it. But it's not. It's something that may happen 3 months from now, or 3 months ago. I lay there. I'll get very tired. I'll sit there, very, very tired. I'll go to bed, and boing, I'm a wide awake character. My mind doesn't shut, and I don't. I probably should take hypnotism. I don't know. If I have advice for people, mainly young people, but anybody, is to press as close as you can to God, and try to figure out, and it's not always easy, but the wisdom to know when to love and when to let go. And God is immensely good for that. It's most, for me, it's most important to love people let them be, stand by if they need help. And that's what I try to do, especially with my kids, but anybody, even my friends. If I see somebody going the wrong way, I gently may say something, but sometimes that person has to find out on their own. And the best thing I can do is to stand by when they need help or when they want to return to friendship, to the Lord, to whatever. I can't be judged. That's my biggest sin, is judgment. So in my church, you go to confession, which I haven't been for a while because I don't like the priest. But nonetheless, it's still the same. If I had to go to confession, it would be, I am extremely judgmental. So here I am, very judgmental, and I know this is wrong. So then I'm the other way. My pendulum goes way back, so I'm not judgmental at all. You can do whatever you want. I don't care. It doesn't matter. But that's wrong. Somehow, and I seldom stay in the middle. Judgment is a huge, huge sin in my life. So I just got to let go and let God, so to speak. And things happen a day at a time. I cannot and do not want to deal with what's in the past that's happened. I can help it as long as it affects me, but really I can't help much of the past. And the future is going to happen. So there's not a lot. I live pretty much day by day. I have to, especially the older I get. And I was telling Jeremy the other day that when I was young, there was really black and there was really white. There wasn't much gray. The older I get, almost everything is gray. I have enough physical problems, heart and this and that all the stuff that's happening, I grieve for the people in Ukraine. I would give them money. If I were really young, I could go over and minister to them, but I can't. My physical life doesn't allow that. And if I spend a lot of time either in political issues or the world issues, that's a detriment to me. So at this time in my life, I pretty much have to address my physical stuff. Not my emotional, not my spiritual, but my physical stuff. I have to do that, or I'm not going to make it a long time. And I want to be around. I want to hold my first great-grandchild. So I'm pragmatic, and I pretty much live in the day. Good or bad, that's how it is. My proudest moment, I would have to say, is how my children have become the adults that they are. I may not agree with them in everything they do or say, but I'm extremely proud that they are who they are. They're able to say what they believe and believe what they say. So to me, what better thing than a parent than their children are who they are? You don't have to agree with everybody. And heaven's sakes, we wouldn't have a very interesting world if we did. But just the fact that if I die today, it is well with my soul. It is well with my soul, with my family, with my belief in God. I don't like what I'm seeing in the world, but that doesn't affect my soul. My proud moment is that God is good. He has seen me through so much. I don't know if one should be proud about that, but it's extremely comforting and happy.